Medical knowledge 20 years ago was only available to the doctors who could go to the medical libraries, the big expensive textbooks. Now it's available to everyone.
Hello fellow Homo sapiens. Today it is part 2 of our conversation with the internationally recognised paediatric neurologist and researcher from Glasgow University, Sameer Zuberi. Today's episode with Sameer is about the reclassifications or renaming of epilepsy syndromes in young children, which is those up to about the age of 2. I can imagine some people's response, I know more renaming, right? But Sameer actually explains to us the very, very good reasons why this has been done with us, people with epilepsy and families, etc., with us in mind. In our chat with Sameer, you will see a few terms highlighted. Remember that you can find these terms described at epilepsysparks.com/glossary. And if you'd like to learn more about Sameer, make sure that you check him out at torierobinson.com/epilepsy-sparks-insights/Sameer-Zuberi. The links for each are in the text below.
I'm a consultant paediatric neurologist at the Royal Hospital for Children in Glasgow in Scotland in the United Kingdom, and I'm also an honorary professor at the University of Glasgow, and my main clinical and research interests are in childhood epilepsy, in neurogenetics, and I also see children with sleep disorders, and I'm also the on-call neurologist for the Children's Hospital.
Could you please tell us about your work with the ILAE, or the International League Against Epilepsy, and specifically your work with the task force which has been working on the ILAE new classifications of epilepsy syndromes?
Yes, so I've been involved with the International League Against Epilepsy in their classification commission and terminology commission for many years, since 2009.
Whoa.
And I was the chair of the commission between 2013 and 2017, which ended up with the new classification of the epilepsies and seizure types. So that was a privilege to chair that the commission at that time. And then over the last few years, I've been working with lots of colleagues on the epilepsy syndromes. Now, many of you will know what epilepsy syndromes are. Basically, they're the highest level of classification of the epilepsies, and that's what we always strive to do, so that we can tell people, exactly what the nature of their epilepsy is, what the future will hold for them. But the International League Against Epilepsy had recognised epilepsy syndromes in the past, but had never actually had a group classifying them in great detail,
right,
and producing an International League endorsed description of these epilepsy syndromes. So the task force was led by Elaine Wirrell from the United States and Paolo Tinuper from Italy, and they basically broke up us into different groups, looking at epilepsy syndromes in neonates and infants, which was one group which I was involved with largely, but I also had input into the other groups as well, and then in children, and then in adults and what we call variable age onset epilepsies, and then there was another task force looking at what we call the genetic generalized epilepsies. So that's a common group of epilepsies such as childhood absence epilepsy, juvenile myoclonic epilepsy, general tonic-clonic seizures alone, and juvenile absence epilepsy that are often linked together. And they're very common. So I think it was felt that they needed their own paper. So anyway, these task groups worked for several years, 4 years.
Gosh, that's a while.
It's a long time, and many people working on this, looking at the literature, and describing each different syndromes within those age groups. And as I said, I was involved in the task force looking at the neonates and infants. What we did was look at the most common epilepsy syndromes and define those. We, in our paper, we have produced a detailed description of all those syndromes, what people should look after, and also we produced what I think are really nice tables which give you the mandatory features for each syndrome, any exclusionary features, and also some what are called alerts for each syndrome. So if you see these features, it makes you think, oh well, could this be the syndrome? Is it really that? So diagnostic clues for people. And also, because the International League Against Epilepsy is really for everyone in the whole world, it's not for people in high resource countries, we've looked at how you can diagnose these syndromes in parts of the world where you may not have easy access to EEG or MRI scans or gene testing.
Oh, that's brilliant.
Which in reality most people with epilepsy don't have access to these things. So how can someone in a low and middle income country make a diagnosis of one of these syndromes? And the other thing that we've done in these syndromes is we've changed some of the names. We've hopefully made the language much more easily accessible. I think that's really important because medical knowledge 20 years ago was only available to the doctors who could go to the medical libraries, the big expensive textbooks. Now it's available to everyone. Everyone can get everything, and that's quite natural that anyone with any condition, or you've got a child or a relative with a condition or a friend, you would want to learn about that. So the language we use must be common between people affected by the condition and people managing and treating the condition.
It's so lovely you say that, because it's a really common almost obstacle, I think, to learning about one's own disease or the disease of your child or loved one, is that these words have too many flipping syllables in them, mate. What does this mean? So to have something that's easier to actually understand and learn is it's lovely as a patient to know that is being considered and actually implemented from the perspective of the clinician.
So simple things like words like idiopathic and cryptogenic, that no one really knows what they mean. So if you're really meaning that it's unknown, you say it's unknown. I don't know the cause.
Right.
So you say it's unknown, and then you admit to the patient, well, sorry, I don't know the cause of your epilepsy, but but also that means that you're thinking, I'm going to keep looking.
Right. It doesn't mean we've given up on you.
It means it's unknown at the moment, and I've done all the investigations, but in a year's time, I may be able to do more. I think again. I'm always, actively considering what the cause is, so that, that in case that might potentially give you a better treatment. So it's the language also helps the management, and also being a bit more honest about things. So there are a lot of epilepsies in the past that have been called benign, and when you use the term benign, people think, oh, it's fine then, it's not going to cause any problems, it's something that's safe and nice. But actually, when you look at some of these epilepsies with the term benign on them, they can be associated with seizures that for the individual are really quite frightening,
right?
When they experience them, and also for the family when they observe the seizures, they're quite frightening as well. And also they may be associated with other conditions like specific learning problems, etc. So they're not necessarily benign for that person.
And also it makes me think of skin cancer, because I always think of skin, you have an abnormal growth which is tested, oh, it's benign, don't worry. Yeah. I never really associated it with epilepsies before, or any other sort of condition.
So there are lots of epilepsy syndromes which have the term benign in front of them, which isn't always appropriate. So instead of that, we're using other terms like self-limited, which means actually this epilepsy, you will grow out of it.
Nice.
Okay. It doesn't mean that it won't cause you problems when it's there.
And also, potentially, if it causes you problems when you're little, even if you grow out of it, that can still affect you as an adult because of the way it's impacted your life as a child, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Those experiences that you've had, maybe the consequences of the epilepsy as a younger, might impact on you later on in life. So that's really important. So the epilepsy syndromes papers, I think, are quite a landmark for the International League Against Epilepsy. There is one paper that basically describes the methodology, and Elaine Wirrell is the first author of that paper, and she describes exactly how we looked at these syndromes. And the task force is, the way these papers are developed, the International League has a group of people interested in a field. We'll then look in detail at it, we'll discuss, we'll prepare papers, we'll give lectures, we'll give talks, and in those we'll get feedback from the epilepsy community. And then after maybe a year or two of that, then they will write a paper, which is a proposal paper that is then submitted to Epilepsia, the main epilepsy journal. It is reviewed by many reviewers, and also the same paper goes online. And then all the epilepsy community, including patient advocacy groups, medical organizations, are encouraged to comment on the paper. So you can get hundreds and hundreds of comments.
I've seen some of them. It's crazy. It like goes on for infinity almost.
But it's great because then you look at those comments, and then what happens is it goes back to another task force who might include some of the people from the first task force, who will then look at that first paper and then modify it with taking into account what the epilepsy community has said. So you've gone through a really rigorous process to get what's called a position paper for the International League. So in that way, because you've gone through this complex process of lots of engagement with the community and with clinicians, you can hopefully get something at the end that is acceptable. Now, any scientific paper is not acceptable to everyone. There will always be some people who say, well, I like that term, why have you got rid of it? I understand that. But and there's some people say, why are you changing the classifications? Why does the International League Against Epilepsy do this? And I think they have to. Science is constantly changing.
There is a reason behind it, and it's because we are openly being contradicted by new evidence.
New evidence and new attitudes. And
yes,
we're talking about the fact that now everyone in the world has access to information, data. So you need to make your language accessible to everyone. So that's a really important reason to think about classifications. Also, the way we treat epilepsy is changing. So we've moved into the era of precision therapies, which are linked to the underlying etiology. So we're now defining syndromes by their etiology, by their cause. So in the past, epilepsy syndromes were diagnosed by the pattern of seizures, the age of onset, the EEG features, maybe other problems that the child or adult had. And we still do that. But we also understand that there are epilepsy syndromes that are first been identified by someone doing a gene test and saying this patient has a variant in the gene, for example, CDKL5 gene. And then they look at all the people with CDKL5 variants and they say, oh, actually, their epilepsy looks really similar and their clinical picture looks very similar and how they develop over time looks similar. So that can become an etiology, a cause-defined syndrome. And so now that's a new group of syndromes that have been brought into this classification. And we hope that with our understanding of the knowledge of the epilepsies, this list is going to get longer.
Yeah. And
that's the next stage. So, I said I'd been involved in this classification work since 2009. So, Professor Helen Cross is the president of the International League, asked if I would join another task force, which is being led by one of my good friends and colleagues, Ingrid Scheffer from Australia, which is going to be looking at these etiology-defined syndromes in the era of precision medicine and seeing if we can define more of those, so we can find more targets for specific treatments in epilepsy.
Just for people who are like, oh my goodness, like this is so much information already, how can we almost embrace more? Yes, as we were actually speaking about before we started recording, the more we learn, the more we realise we don't know, and that can be intimidating. But it also gives us, as you were saying, a much greater opportunity for precision medicine and for improving the quality of life of the people affected by these epilepsies and the people surrounding them and loving them. And so I think just bring on the research and bring on the better care, and that is what the future holds for us.
I hope so.
Thank you so much for joining us, Sameer. It's been an absolute pleasure again.
Thank you very much, Torie. Thank you.